So welcome, everyone. We have a session with Abi Noda, who's the CEO of GetDX. And the session's name is What Should I Ask My Developers for My Portal? And the theme of today and tomorrow is really building an internal developer portal, taking up a portal's product approach, figuring out what use cases developers need to have. And it's not only that it's challenging sometimes for platform engineers to be product managers, it's even more challenging to really understand what should be measured and what people should be asked in order to do a good job for them. So we'll do this in a question and answer format. So I'd like to ask Abi some questions about what should we ask our developers. And let us begin. So I'm going to share my screen. So Abi, thank you for joining us. And again, what do I ask developers when planning the portal? I didn't even write survey because it's much more than that. But before we begin, I'd love to hear the story behind establishing DX and your background, because I think that will probably inform us better when asking you questions later on, and will probably help the audience ask questions as well.
Sure. Yeah, Ronnie, thanks for having me here. Excited to have this discussion. So my name is Abi. I'm the co-founder and CEO of DX. We're a developer intelligence platform. So we provide data and insights to engineering leaders to help them take the right action to drive higher ROI per developer, increase productivity, optimize engineering. And I started DX after spending several years in the same space of measuring developer productivity, building two companies actually in the space previously. Started DX because it became clear that there was another side to the story in terms of the data that organizations needed to address these complex questions. And so whereas the traditional approach to understanding productivity has relied on metrics such as story points and cycle time and pull requests. With DX, we, in addition to those types of metrics, provide organizations with self-reported metrics and insights from developers. And this gives you such a fuller view of the system because you're able to get visibility into areas that you can't measure objectively. You're also able to understand the developer experience and the actual friction points that developers face day to day. So today we work with about 200 organizations across the world, both tech companies like Dropbox and Toast, as well as traditional enterprises like Fiserv and Tesco, P&G, Pfizer. So yeah, the market seems to be receiving us well, and excited to share more about any learnings that may be valuable to your audience today.
Can you tell us about the magic of self-reporting versus just plain measurement?
Yeah, so self-reported metrics, there's some cynicism towards them for good reason, that they can be subjective or error prone, or they require surveys which are burdensome to developers and expensive to run. But when you look at how leading organizations in the industry like Google or Microsoft, Spotify, and the 200 organizations that we work with are actually getting data and insights about developer productivity, the self-reported insights are a huge critical tool in getting the data we need. And one example of why self-reported data is so important is that a lot of larger organizations, to measure something, say for example, like MTTR, if you're a small startup, MTTR is really easy to measure. You can just look at your Jira board and count how long it takes for bugs and defects to be resolved. But if you work in an organization with thousands of developers, you're probably scattered across different ways of tracking defects and incidents, potentially different tools or setups within those tools. And so it can take months, even sometimes years, to be able to triangulate all that data with deployment data across different systems and really answer the questions you want to get insight into. And so, just going to developers and asking them how long something takes is an alternative to that. In addition to being able to ask developers how long something takes, you could ask them, whether they feel that the process is effective or what the roadblocks are in the way of them doing their best work or resolving problems with customers. And so, yeah, self-report is really just a data collection method, no different than how we more typically collect metrics from our systems. But it's really important because there's so much more to developer productivity than what the system-based metrics can tell us alone. And that's where self-reported data comes into play.
So kind of trying to repeat what you're saying, instead of getting into a religious discussion on how do you measure MDTR in a huge organization with many types of systems and developers, actually asking people what they feel about that, assuming they're honest, they want to do a good job, and of course they do, will provide a very valuable metric that the organization can then manage around.
Exactly.
Good. It makes us all feel better to ask all kinds of questions and not just measure stuff. Next question, developer productivity and developer experience. I know you guys touch on both. And of course, you can say that one would create the other. What are your views there?
I think there's different ways of looking at this. In my view, developer productivity and developer experience are not the same thing, because when we talk about developer experience, we're talking about the friction and processes and tools that developers encounter in their work. And that's different than developer productivity, which is more of an output of what developers do and how businesses think about the investment or return on investment they're getting out of their R&D organizations. And so, different ways to look at it include, developer productivity being a subset of developer experience, right? Productivity is one dimension in the being of developers. Another way to look at this is that developer productivity is the output or outcome of developer experience. We know from data that organizations and teams with better developer experience are more productive. And at the individual level, we also know from research and data that developers who have less friction points in their day-to-day work feel and are more productive. And so that shouldn't be surprising to anyone listening. But those are some ways to think about productivity and experience together.
And in a very kind of coarse way, would you say that developer experience is measured through the self-reported part of surveys, or through surveys really, whilst productivity can be both surveyed, as you just gave us an example before that with regards to the MTTR, and measured objectively, quote unquote, from various data within the engineering organization?
It's a good question. I would say both productivity and developer experience, in addition to a lot of other dimensions like software quality and engagement, all those things can be measured and should be measured with a combination of self-reported data as well as objective system data. I think the optimal form of measurement for a given metric ultimately depends on a number of factors. One being, can it be measured objectively? There are certain things like developer satisfaction that you really can't measure objectively just by their nature. And then there's also things like the MTTR example where you can measure something objectively, but it may not be the most practical way depending on your systems and your organization. And so I would decouple the method of measurement from the object of measurement. And you can think about the two independently.
Okay, I'm starting to think about a lot of questions around how do you survey developers about whether they're happy with tools, whether there are other ways they would like to use tooling, but we'll get into them in a minute. So I'm mentioning the thought. So before we go into portals, so portals are supposed to provide some sort of self-service experience, just like all of platform engineering. That should be important to both productivity and experience. Hopefully, if developers waste less time doing stuff they don't like or stuff that's very manual, they're happier. Same applies for productivity. The connectivity is there, is actually fairly self-evident. But if we ignore portals for a minute, what is the process that happens post measurement or survey? So what do companies usually do? So they run periodical surveys, if you can talk about that a little, and then how do they identify areas for improvement?
That depends on an organization's goals, right? I mean, why are they measuring? So, if an organization is measuring to retain their top talent, that's a different objective than if an organization is measuring to because they feel like they're delivering software too slowly, or because they're really focused on eliminating bottlenecks and friction for developers. And so, I would say firstly, it depends what the organization's actual goals are. Some organizations just want to keep a pulse on things, right? Have visibility into the system and into their organization. And in some of those cases, no action necessarily needs to come out of the output of the data you're getting if you're just trying to keep tabs on what's happening and how things are changing. But in cases where there is a business goal or initiative or objective around why things are being measured, then absolutely, two things that are key are, one, getting the data into the right hands and in front of the right people. Two is actually interpreting the data and making decisions and deciding what actions to take. And then three is following through on those things and then remeasuring once those actions or initiatives are delivered to make sure that they actually move the needle and had an impact. And so, what those specific actions are and what these initiatives may look like, again, depend on what the specific goals are or goal is. But that's roughly the three-step process for any organization.
And those, generally speaking, I'm sure there's no general answer. The teams that are measuring developer experience and or developer productivity, are they usually adjacent or part of the platform engineering team? So where they see the two ideas married, or they're kind of separate, and then they have to engage the platform engineering team to perform those experience improvements?
It's a great question. I mean, measuring productivity is critical to platform organizations and teams, but it's not exclusively the concern of platform teams. Measuring productivity is something that all the way up to the boardroom and C-level leaders care a lot about. And so I wouldn't necessarily say that measuring developer productivity is the responsibility of platform organizations, but certainly platform organizations are a major stakeholder, and oftentimes the folks spearheading, because it's particularly existential for platform teams, right? If you can't measure productivity, then you don't really have concrete data around the opportunities or problems you're trying to tackle as a platform organization. And if you can't show that, then how are you also going to be able to show the ROI of the investments you make and the efforts you put in? So really critical to platform organizations, but really critical to all parts of the organization, because there's a lot of investments happening in a technology organization outside of platform initiatives by themselves.
Okay. And then a question, I'm not sure you can answer that, but earlier, about a couple of minutes ago, you were talking about different motivations to start the developer productivity or experience measurement. Some of them may be around, are we productive enough? Are we using our assets well? And others may be around developer happiness and developer retention. If there are only two types of people in the world either doing this or that, are they 50-50? Are they more led by experience or by productivity questions?
There's a lot of things that I think factor in. I mean, at the current moment, some of the most common objectives are around improving and optimizing efficiency, as well as understanding and maximizing the impact of tools like GitHub Copilot. I would say those are the two primary concerns at the moment. But if you'd asked me 8 months ago, it would have been much more focused around developer retention and reducing regrettable attrition, and even how to create a better developer experience to improve hiring and be more competitive in the job market. So, as trends and economic conditions change, the concerns of businesses change, and therefore the goals of measuring and improving productivity change as well.
So initially it was like, can we retain our employees? And now it's like, what is AI going to do to the way we employ people?
Yeah.
What can be measured and what required surveys? We touched on that with MTTR. I want to ask another question here, touching portals a little. We had a discussion just before this session, developers and portals in the real life. And someone had mentioned that they think that a certain action without a portal, without a platform, will take a developer 85 minutes, and with a portal, it will take 5 minutes. That's great news. But if I'm now going to design my portal, how do I get to that conclusion? Do I do like Taylorism, like to like measure how, sit next to someone and measure stuff? Do I do surveys? How specific do I get there? Or do I do some other qualitative effort? If you were to design those questions, what tips could you give portal managers?
Yeah, it depends on where you are, I think, in the journey. So we work with a lot of organizations and teams that are investing in developer portals, and measurement is a critical piece of how they determine their roadmap and are able to evangelize and get investment in these areas. So if you're just starting out, I think one of the most important things you should be measuring is really productivity holistically. There's that famous Henry Ford quote, like if you'd ask customers what they want, they would have said faster horses. And so,
Yeah.
you don't want to be going around trying to ask developers about whether or not they want a developer portal. You want to be understanding the state of developer productivity as a whole, and understanding what are the areas that are affecting developer productivity the most. Then using that data, and not just from self-reported data from surveys, but also leveraging system-based metrics and interviews and other forms of data collection, you can build a business case, right, for why a developer portal makes sense in the organization, and what the specific areas and challenges developers are facing that the developer portal can potentially solve. Once
Okay.
you're yeah.
Well,
Once
go
you're
ahead.
past that initial point of getting investment and buy-in for a developer portal, then I think the objective changes a little bit. It becomes more focused on really driving the roadmap and driving feedback loops with your customers, who are your developers internally. And so, for that, what we see be successful is more granular measurement and qualitative data captured through surveys that dig in a little deeper into the specific types of workflows and challenges that a developer portal can solve. We also start to see measurement of satisfaction and utilization of the developer portal itself. And one specific method we've seen a lot of customers we work with use is the use of sort of in the moment feedback. So, being able to collect feedback from developers while they're interacting with the developer portal, no different than collecting feedback from developers or users while they're interacting with any other product. If we've ever been in some product and gotten a pop-up or
Yeah.
email after completing a transaction or using a new beta feature, it's the same concept. And so we call that experience sampling or transactional surveys. But that's been a really effective way to get really targeted feedback from developers in the moment while they're actually using a specific feature in the developer portal.
And in that case, do they like click on the green smileys to say they're happy or unhappy? Or is there like open text to say, I did not like this self-service action because, and there's some form to complete or some sentence to complete?
Yeah, I think what we've seen be most effective is, again, a mix of qualitative and quantitative data in this case. So, both asking developers about their satisfaction or how easy or clear or successful a process was. For example, spinning up a new service in a developer portal.
Yeah.
How was that experience? Was it easy? Was it difficult? Was it satisfactory? And then also prompting for self-reported objective metrics like how long did it take you to complete that action, but then also prompting for open feedback. How could this feature in the developer portal be improved? And that qualitative feedback piece, in particular when collected in this manner, gives really rich insights and feedback, because the people you're asking are right there, right? They've just completed or interacted with your product. And so the feedback you can get is much better than if you were to ask them 3 weeks later in a broader survey for feedback about the developer portal.
Yeah, I agree. It makes sense. When you guys survey people, or when you think about it, do you believe in like asking people about focus time, time wasted versus time coding and in deep thought? And then do you think that can be tied into a portal when they're actually imagining a faster horse? So can you ask a meaningful question there?
I think we do measure dimensions such as focus time and deep work. That's one of the numerous areas that make up developer experience, and it's an important predictor of developer productivity and efficiency. I'm not sure if that would necessarily directly tie into a developer portal, at least in my experience and what I've seen with the organizations we work with. I'd say that we see much more visible opportunity with developer portals in areas like knowledge sharing and documentation, or of course, infrastructure management and service discovery. Those are frequent and common challenges identified within organizations. And I know a lot of organizations who've, once seeing that data, gone and looked into or invested in developer portals. And so, yeah, in terms of the clearest business case I've seen where the data ties to developer portals, that would probably be it.
So mostly, how long does it take you to find an answer to a question or get information that you need, rather than if you had an ability to do this or that self-service action, would you have more deep work? You're not sure that would be, you're gonna hit a home run there. And then one last question on this. If you're a smaller organization, so let's say an organization with 200 developers, no developer productivity practice within the organization, do you still recommend using surveys and doing them periodically? And what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we work with a lot of organizations that don't have a dedicated platform or developer productivity function, or maybe they do, but they're not the ones necessarily in charge of collecting this type of data and running analyses on it. And so, if you're a smaller organization, and if you're even thinking about developer productivity, then getting this type of data, being able to measure it is the right place to start. And in fact, I would say two things. One, if you're someone who wants to get more investment in a developer productivity initiative or establish a developer productivity team, there's no better way to do that than through data. And I would also say that we recently, and it'll actually be published later this week, ran a study of about 20 companies and looked at, when they started a developer productivity function, what was the first thing, or what was the thing that got them funded to get off the ground? And the results were really interesting. We found that 30% of the team started out by focusing on or tackling CI/CD bottlenecks and opportunities. But we also saw about, I think it was 20% started with data collection, metrics, and insights. And so metrics and insights, whether survey-based or system-based, are a common place for developer productivity teams to start in terms of focusing on.
I fully agree with that. Incidentally, when we interview people on why they started a platform, not even a portal, CI/CD comes up quite a lot. So I actually saw, I glanced at what you posted on LinkedIn about this exact point, and I thought, wow, we've heard the same thing. And I think what it really boils down to, both on the measurement side and on the CI/CD side, is the organization willing to admit that it has a productivity problem or delivery problem that is not tied to rogue developers not working enough, but rather something deep about the technology or the processes provided to developers that is creating something very wasteful and a poor experience.
Yep.
And it seems that at that point, they either go measure it or go fix their CI/CD. It's the same thing, really.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting. I saw that, in between sessions this morning. What are bad things you can do in surveying developers? What questions should you not ask if somebody decides to do those surveys by themselves?
I mean, designing good surveys is tricky. It requires quite a bit of expertise and investment to design questions that can be interpreted accurately, comprehended cross-culturally, even across different languages, in order to actually give you reliable data and insights back. And so, one of the most common mistakes is just approaching this haphazardly. I see so many surveys out there that are haphazardly constructed, and the data and results aren't reliable. And when that happens, it's really a waste of everyone's time. It's the waste of the developers' time who are filling these things out. It's the waste of time for the people who are designing and administrating and trying to use this data. And so good design is really important. I think another common pitfall is understanding anonymity. So how do you at the same time get data that is actionable and useful? Because if everything's anonymous, it's difficult to actually know where and with whom to take action to actually improve things. But at the same time, how do you capture honest feedback from developers and make the survey safe and comfortable for folks to give accurate data back to whoever's collecting it. So that's another challenge. Participation rates is a really big challenge, because if you can't get a high enough sustained participation rate, you're getting very incomplete, spotty data, which isn't reliable. And so, we've seen that within most of the organizations we work with, you have to be able to sustain 80, even 90% plus participation rates in order for this type of self-reported data to really be able to stand firm and be credible within the organization.
So
Three examples.
How do you generate those participation rates?
I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. It's all a bit circular. So starting with good design and you're making sure the survey experience itself is of high quality and is relevant and useful to not only platform organizations and executives, but also to the developers and teams themselves. Being able to share the data back quickly with teams and developers, so that this data is not just going into a black hole and it feels like sharing information was worthwhile. There's a lot that goes into communication and rollout of these types of survey programs at organizations. There's a lot of constant program upkeep and fine-tuning communication, reporting to stakeholders and getting executive buy-in. Probably not so dissimilar to like a developer portal. There's a lot of organizational change management, communication that needs to happen to sustain these types of efforts. So, I've done interviews with the developer productivity teams at places like LinkedIn and Google, and they'll talk a lot about their survey and data collection programs and the amount of investment that goes into them. But it takes quite a bit of work. It's not as simple as spinning up a form and shooting out a link to the organization. Unfortunately,
it's not a Google form. And you also mentioned in passing, you probably need to segment your developers, their underlying technologies, teams, apps, business role to make any sense of the results.
Yeah, industry benchmarking is really crucial to contextualizing data and understanding. Developers are this satisfied. Well, is that good? Is that bad? It's hard to answer that question unless you can compare against a broader population of developers. So yeah, a lot goes into this that you start discovering once you start trying to run these types of surveys.
I did see some sample surveys on your site, so whatever you're saying, we should not discourage people from trying them out and at least dipping their foot in the water.
Absolutely. I mean, most of the organizations we work with have started out with trying to use Google Forms and run their own surveys. So it's never harmful to get started and to try to collect data. You shouldn't wait to necessarily purchase a platform or solution like DX to do it. There are plenty of organizations that have also built their own custom tooling to do this sort of thing. So you can get started with one question in a Google form, certainly. But again, as you think more broadly about how to sustain a program like this and how to make it really valuable to leadership and teams and platform organizations, there starts to be more involved than what can easily be kind of homegrown.
So what, if you were giving us a couple tips about what would you ask people with regards to a portal?
So earlier I talked about kind of the two phases, right? If you're surveying or measuring to build a business case or get investment for a portal, it's a little bit different than once you're getting started and you're really trying to understand how to build out a portal effectively. So my first piece of advice for the latter case would be to think about what dimensions, what are the areas that the developer portal could potentially solve. And so things that come to my mind and what I've seen organizations do are things like documentation, things like service creation, or being able to look up, like in the course of developing a new product feature, being able to understand what services are available to be utilized, or to be able to maybe have better visibility into service health and monitoring. So what I would do and recommend is use questions that capture the state of difficulty and efficiency around those things in the survey. So, for example, a question like, how much time, in a typical month, how much time do you feel is wasted due to, needing to manually try to figure out what services are out there that you could leverage? I'm not recommending that exact question, but just to illustrate, that would give you back a number that could be used to understand how big of a problem that actually is and in which areas of the organization that problem is most present. And so the same concept would apply to other dimensions, whether it be managing the different tools or documentation and information around services, or any of the other potential problems that you might be envisioning solving with a developer portal. I would measure those things, not necessarily asking about a developer portal. Then once you're more in the later stages of having rolled out the portal, then you can start asking questions around, for example, satisfaction with the portal, or time spent using the portal, or asking about specific features within the portal. So that's where you're really trying to optimize the user or developer experience with your product, because you're past the point of understanding the broad opportunities of things you can solve with the developer portal investment.
So initially, I would be asking, how much time do you spend searching for APIs or discovering where your service is within the general architecture, or spinning up a microservice, requesting an ephemeral environment? And then later on, I can ask about this specific feature, but I'm not committing something wrong survey-wise, asking how much time are you spending doing something, and you do believe in the self-reporting aspect of that.
It's really case dependent. There's a lot of things that go into that. For example, what's a reasonable recall period for someone answering a question like that? I mean, if you ask someone, in the last 6 months, how much time have you spent doing X? They're not going to be able to give you a reasonable signal. Also, do you ask about absolute time? Do you ask about frequency? More like, how often do you find yourself encountering this problem? Is a different way to ask the question than how much time do you spend due to this problem. You can also ask, questions around like percentage based, like how much of your time is allocated to this area of work or problem. So again, there's a lot of nuance. I wouldn't personally recommend the specific question I suggested off the cuff. Each of these questions typically takes dozens of hours to first develop and then test. So, at DX, every question that we develop goes through hours and hours of expert review and cognitive interviews, and then statistical analysis, item level statistics, correlations, predictive modeling to really make sure that the data we're gathering is useful and reliable. Not that you have to do that again if you're just getting started, but only to say, yeah, it's not easy for me or anyone to just come up with a off the cuff great survey question.
I'm going to be very suspicious of my use of Google Forms from now into any future. Okay, I think we kind of touched on that below us. Just this is the question, but I think if I understand what you've been telling me so far, you can ask about existing developer tooling. So that's another way actually to justify an investment can be how happy are you with your current developer tooling? And then later on, when we have a portal, we can ask about that. And it's okay to, you actually would suggest both understanding the general developer experience for a given group of developers and ask the specific questions about the tooling or the portal.
Again, it completely depends on your goals. So, I mean, if you're a platform organization or a small platform team, you're really focused on developer tooling and portals specifically, then don't add things that aren't going to be useful to you in that journey. But when we look at what's working effectively for larger organizations with sustained developer survey programs, it's always a mix of specific questions around developer tooling, as well as more generalized measurement of developer experience and productivity as a whole. So yeah, it's finding that right balance between the two.
And then another question that you kind of answer, once you have the portal, what type of feedback loops should you establish? So your best practices really is both kind of surveys and the in the moment. How was this experience for you?
Yeah, the in the moment experience sampling, as we refer to it, is probably the most valuable thing I've seen for platform teams building developer platforms or portals who are past the point of getting that initial roadmap established and funding, but are looking to really build a great internal developer experience and product, because that in the moment feedback is real time and it's consistent. It's not something you have to wait till the next quarterly survey for. It's something that you're constantly getting daily feedback, depending on like how aggressively you run these things, and it's really actionable, right? It's like no different than with our businesses if we were asking users in the moment of them using particular parts of our product about their thoughts and experiences with them. So it's a really great way of getting feedback that can go directly into the backlog.
And probably exposes blind spots.
Yeah.
If I use the feature and it doesn't work as expected, or something is really wrong with the user experience, that's the place to discover it and not later on.
Yep.
And then roadmap items. So if, let's say I've launched a portal MVP, I've done, let's say I've done deploying a feature to production type features in my portal MVP, and there's a software catalog, of course. And now I want to extend the portal to another use case. Let's say feature flags. So should I be asking, should we add feature flags to the portal, or is that too direct and not good?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't recommend that, and I don't have a literary explanation of why I wouldn't recommend it, but I think a good way to think about that would be that's typically not something we do with our products as software businesses. I mean, we don't survey our customers and ask them, should we build feature X, yes or no? Understanding where we should invest is a much more nuanced exercise, typically involving focus groups and one-on-one interviews and conversations, and really coding and interpreting and aggregating all the qualitative findings that we're hearing. So I wouldn't recommend driving roadmap based on voting or binary responses from the population that is probably spending a split second thinking about these questions. They're not deeply thinking about. Right. Whereas if you interview them and ask them about how they're solving a problem currently, or what their day looks like, or what the tooling, how it's working for them, then you're going to uncover real opportunities and problems.
So I could theoretically make the feature flag question about using the feature flag in the portal. Somebody would say yes. And then I discovered that their team does not use feature flags.
Yeah, I mean,
that can happen.
If you're trying to understand feature flags, you probably want to go understand, teams that might be moving slower. Is that because there's a heavier process involved to move a feature into production because they can't use feature flags, for example, or because they don't know how the feature flagging system works, or they didn't know that even existed, right? So you don't want to ask people, do you want feature X? You want to ask about how they're currently solving a problem, or what the pain points and friction points that they're currently experiencing are.
So this was really interesting. I'll open this to questions from the audience. If there are any questions, and there's Abby's mail, my mail, and you can also go to GetDX, who are also a sponsor here, and try out their surveys. Anything I should have asked you, or that you want to give as kind of last bit of advice to people designing portals today?
No, I think, we see a lot of excitement and interest by platform organizations and in developer portals. I'm a big fan of the port platform, personally. And, I think it's just good this type of data we're talking about today is really important, because number one pitfall we see with developer portals is folks get really excited about it, go out and spend a bunch of money or time building one of them, and then later realize, what's the problem we're actually trying to solve, or what was it worth it? What's the ROI of this developer portal? And so, being a more data driven and collecting this type of information early on will help steer your efforts in the right direction and make sure that you can always justify the investment.
Yeah, I agree. I will list the one question we got, which is a contrarian viewpoint, but I think it's a joke. Acosta said, why ask developers what they need? Let them design the portal and then just administer it. But then I think we'd end up with a faster horse. So that would not work well. Thank you very much, Abby.
Yep.
And we will have a short break, and then we will reconvene. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Ronnie, and thanks everyone for joining.
Bye.